The wagon creaked along the dusty road like it resented every turn of the wheels. Dusk had begun to drape itself over the ridgeline west of Bitter Trace, the kind of dusk that came slow and dry, full of warning and no comfort. Wind tugged weakly at the sparse brush but carried no scent, just the worn smell of rope, old wood, and horses tired from too many miles. On the bench seat sat a stiff, unspeaking man and a girl of 9 named Letty Ray Morgan. Her yellow dress had once belonged to her mother, and it hung on her like a ghost too big for her shoulders. Her hands, scabbed and calloused, sat folded tight in her lap like she was trying to disappear. Her father, Eldon Morgan, hadn't looked at her once since they left the prairie edge. He guided the mule team to a stop in front of a leaning general store with windows that hadn't seen soap in a decade. The hitching post sagged like it had lost the will to stand. From the alley behind the store came a woman with a crooked bun and teeth stained with tobacco. She wiped her hands on a dirty apron and looked at Eldon like she'd been waiting too long. "This her?" she asked, eyes narrow. Eldon jerked his chin toward the girl. Letty didn't move. "She cook?" the woman asked. "Better'n most women twice her age," Eldon muttered. "Quiet too, won't talk unless she has to, just like her mama." "She clean?" "She ain't dumb, if that's what you're asking." The woman stepped closer and tilted Letty's chin upward with fingers rough like corn husk. Letty didn't blink, didn't flinch, just stared past her, toward the grasslands swaying with the wind like they hadn't made up their mind which way to lean. "She'll do." A purse exchanged hands. It jingled once, sharply. Letty stepped down from the wagon on her own. There was no goodbye, no ruffle of the hair or final word. Eldon turned back toward the reins, mounted the seat and rolled away into a haze of dust, never looking back. She watched him shrink into the horizon until he became a blot on nothing. She never thought of him as Pa again, not even in her mind. The woman grabbed Letty by the wrist. "Rules are simple," she grunted. "You work, you stay. You talk too much, you go. You'll sleep with the others. Don't cry. Nobody here's got time for that." But Letty wasn't listening. She'd folded inward, retreated into the quiet place where shame curled up and waited without sound. Her mama had died the winter before from fever. No money for medicine. Now this. Now being handed off like a sack of oats to someone who wouldn't even learn her name. As they walked behind the store, a man stepped out from the shade of the porch, tall, broad in the shoulders but not hulking, his frame worn like old barnwood. His shirt was plain, his boots scuffed, and gray threaded through his beard like rain left behind by a storm. He didn't speak, just watched her limp wrist dangling in the woman's grip, watched her small feet shuffle across the dirt. Then he turned back into the shadows and vanished. That night, Letty sat on a thin cot in a room that smelled of mildew and old linen. Around her, other girls whispered names to themselves like prayers. Some cried. Some stared blankly at the ceiling. Letty sat with her knees pulled tight to her chest, arms locked around them. She didn't cry. She waited. At the first stroke of dawn, while the shadows still clung to the backs of buildings and dogs were too tired to bark, Letty slipped out through a crooked fence behind the storehouse. Her bare feet tore on gravel, leaving spots of red behind, but she made no sound. Running made noise. She walked, step by step, breath shallow. Her nightdress flapped in the wind like a flag of surrender. By noon, she was little more than a smudge against the prairie, alone, bleeding and fading into the tall grass. When her legs gave out, she crawled. When her arms failed, she collapsed. She woke to the smell of horse sweat and leather. A shadow knelt beside her. Elias Rourke, the man from the porch, hat in hand, one brow furrowed like he was trying to remember something half buried in scripture. "You got a name?" he asked. Letty didn't answer. "I'm Elias." He paused. "I knew your mama, a long time ago." Still nothing, her eyes fixed on his boots. "You hungry?" Her stomach stayed silent, but her legs twitched like they wanted to run again. He didn't wait for a reply. With practiced arms, he lifted her off the ground like she weighed no more than a dry blanket. She didn't resist. Her cheek rested against the flannel of his shirt. It smelled of smoke and rust. She didn't remember the horse, only the slow lift into the saddle and the rhythmic clop of hooves below. They rode like that, her barely awake, him saying nothing. She dreamed half-formed memories, her mother's voice humming while shelling peas, a blue cornflower once pinned in her braid, the sound of wind slipping beneath the door of their old home. The sun was already leaning low by the time Elias turned the horse toward a rise in the land. The house wasn't much. The porch sagged, the walls had long lost their paint. But smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, sure line, and someone had left a chair by the door like he had purpose. He let her sleep in the hayloft that first night, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. No questions, no promises. The next morning, a tin cup of milk waited on the ladder's top rung. She drank it. That was their first real conversation. Weeks passed like wind through wheat, quiet but constant. Elias repaired fence posts. Letty watched. He chopped wood. She followed. She didn't speak. He didn't force her to. One morning she left an apple by his boots. A few nights later he folded her blanket more carefully than usual. She pretended to sleep, but she saw it. A week after that, a bed appeared in the corner of the barn, hand-built, solid, a quilt laid neatly on top. No mention of it, no thanks exchanged, just presence. Then came the first trip into town. They rode in silence. The store was louder than she remembered. The whispers started before they reached the porch. That him? Taken in one of the alley girls now? Always thought Rourke had more sense. She won't last the winter, mark my words. He heard it. So did she. Neither flinched. He paid for coffee and flour, lifted her back onto the horse, said nothing. Inside the store, the owner's wife eyed Letty with suspicion. You help around the place? Letty nodded. You clean? Letty didn't answer. She don't look folks in the eye, does she? Outside, Elias handed her a peppermint candy. You don't owe nobody explanations, he said. She held the candy like it was a treasure and didn't eat it for 3 days. Spring came, then dust, then a storm that broke a window. Letty helped him board it up. He taught her how to oil saddles, how to hammer without splitting the wood. He bought her boots that didn't pinch. She didn't thank him with words. She just polished his saddle the next day without being asked. The townfolk kept whispering, but the noise softened. No, it because they stopped talking, but because neither Elias nor the girl ever gave them the reaction they expected. One day, a preacher came knocking. Pale, oversmiled, eyes sharp under all that warmth. Mr. Rourke, he said, stepping down from his buggy. There's concern. She's kin, Elias said before he could finish. Distant but kin all the same. She doesn't speak, the preacher said. She doesn't need to. Still, this arrangement. Elias closed the door. That night, Letty left something by his plate. A tarnished brooch, cracked at one corner. It had been her mother's. He said nothing, just slipped it into his shirt pocket over his heart. That winter, she got sick. A fever. He sat beside her for 3 days straight, spooning broth into her mouth when she could swallow, wiping her brow with snow-packed cloth. On the 3rd night, she opened her eyes and whispered, "Uncle." He didn't stir, but the corner of his mouth lifted, like a dream had just reached him and told him everything was going to be all right. The next week, they rode to town again. She walked beside him now, boots broken in, hair braided, taller. On the mercantile steps stood the woman with the crooked bun, the one who'd bought her. Their eyes met. Letty froze. The woman blinked, then passed her without a word. Letty reached for Elias's hand. He took it. That night she didn't return to the barn. She laid her things on the old cot in the house and ate stew at the table. When he passed her the bowl, she smiled. Not wide, not loud. But it stayed. Spring stretched wide and restless across the prairie. The wind came in dry, curling along fence posts like it had a message but wouldn't speak it plain. Every morning, Letty Ray Morgan swept the porch before the sun climbed too high. She liked the rhythm of it, bristles scraping wood, dust lifting like thoughts she didn't need to say aloud. She was 10 now. Her boots were broken in, her shoulders straighter. She had learned not to flinch when men talked too loud, not to meet the eyes of the preacher's wife when she passed by too slow, like she was examining a stain. "That's the one," people would mutter. The girl left in the alley, man's charity case. Some said it like pity, others like warning, but Letty didn't hear them the same anymore. Their words didn't cut, not sharp, not fresh, they sank instead, like pebbles in a well too deep to stir. Elias Rourke never spoke on what the town thought, but sometimes over coffee on the porch, he'd murmur just loud enough for the breeze to catch it. People talk when they're scared of silence. She never answered, just stitched his shirts tighter or weeded the onions in cleaner rows. It was the quiet between them that spoke the most. Still, the whispers never died, only changed shape. The saloon girls turned their faces. The storekeeper's wife counted change twice. The children stared too long and never waved. Then one day, at the back of the trading post, a boy no older than 12 leaned toward another near the flour barrels and said too loud, "That's the one they bought and gave back." Letty froze. The sack of salt slipped from her hand. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just walked out, face blank as paper. Elias found her standing near the trough out front, watching water ripple with no expression. "You forget something?" he asked gently. She didn't answer. He followed her gaze, nodded once, and said, "Folks only know the parts of a story they like." That night, she salted the stew in silence and stirred until her wrist ached. They didn't go to town the next Sunday. Instead, they fixed the barn door. She sanded the splinters down smooth. They worked like clock gears, each motion fitting into the other without needing oil or words. But change doesn't knock politely. It came with brass wheels and velvet gloves. A red buggy rolled up the drive one morning. The mayor's wife stepped out, dressed in navy lace, gloves like white shells, perfume thick as judgment. Letty was hanging sheets on the line. The woman's gaze landed sharp. "My husband thinks Mr. Rourke ought to consider a governess," she said. "At her age, girls need structure, discipline, education." Elias came from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Don't need one," he said. "She's at a tender age. Girls left wild tend to rot from the inside. She ain't wild, and she ain't rotten." The woman's smile never cracked. "Careful, Elias. Some folk vote next spring. Land stewards don't win without favor. Ain't running. You'll regret that." "Not likely." She left in a blur of perfume and pearls. Letty finished hanging the last sheet, but her fingers trembled on the pins. That night, she found a worn comb on Elias's dresser, cleaned it, rubbed it with lard to make it smooth, left it quietly on her own windowsill like an offering. 2 days later, he handed her a pair of silver hair ribbons. No explanation. She wore them the next time they rode to town. They didn't stop the whispers, but she held her chin a little higher. In July, the town gathered near the river for a community fair. Lanterns strung between trees, fiddle music, corn cakes, and cider. Letty walked beside Elias with a basket of preserves. Mothers whispered as they passed. Children stared. Near the cider barrels, a woman named Bess Harlan didn't hush her gossip quick enough. "Parading her shame like Sunday shoes," she said too near. Elias turned. "She's got more dignity than any soul here," he said, loud enough to stop forks midair. Letty's cheeks burned. She didn't know whether to feel proud or peeled open. Later that evening, she sat alone on a log while other girls spun in borrowed dresses. No one asked her to dance. She didn't expect it. Still, it pressed something sharp under her ribs. Elias joined her after a while with a tin cup of cider. "Ever dance?" he asked. She shook her head. "You ought to learn." "You'll teach me?" He looked toward the dancing couples. "I'd just stomp on your feet. You deserve better." She didn't reply, just watched the fire flicker across the water. A week later, a schoolteacher came to the ranch to collect census names. She found Letty gutting a rabbit behind the house. "She read yet?" the teacher asked. "She reads fine," Elias answered. "She write?" "She don't need to for what she does. She will, when she's a wife." Letty flinched, not at the word wife, but at the certainty in the teacher's voice. That night, she asked for paper. Elias gave her a charcoal stub and some old receipts. She practiced under lantern light. Her name, the alphabet, Bible verses in crooked lines. By fall, her handwriting curled clean and steady. The next time someone called her tainted, she didn't react. She just smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't show teeth. The kind that makes folks think twice before speaking again. But the wound hadn't vanished, just sunk deeper. Elias saw it in the way she folded clothes too perfect, never left her boots at the door, always let him take the last biscuit even if it had been hers. She slept light, woke often. Sometimes she made tea in the dark and poured it down the sink without drinking. One night she found a stray kitten behind the barn, eyes crusted, ribs like twigs. She wrapped it in an old sock, fed it milk from a cloth. When Elias found her there, rocking the kitten in her lap, she said, "If I take care of something smaller, maybe folks'll stop looking at me like I'm broken." He said nothing, just handed her a clean rag. The kitten lived, grew fat. She named it Mercy. Winter came sharp and full of white teeth. They built a sled together. She laughed for the first time in over a year when they tumbled down the hill behind the barn in a heap of limbs and snow. The sound startled a hawk from the fence post. It circled once and vanished into the sky. Elias held on to the sound like a photograph, rare and worth remembering. The storm didn't announce itself. It built in layers, wind first, then sleet, then a sky that cracked open like a curse. Elias had been working the gelding in the corral when the gate bucked inward. The horse panicked, reared, and caught him full in the shoulder. Letty heard the thud from the loft and scrambled down the ladder before her breath caught up with her body. She found him slumped against the post, jaw clenched, one arm hanging loose. "Just twisted," he grunted. "Maybe broke." She didn't argue. She ducked under his good arm, dragged him into the house with more strength than anyone would have guessed from her size. She boiled water, tore up old shirts for bandages, found a medical flyer in a drawer and followed its diagrams with shaky hands. When he told her, "Do it quick," she did. No flinching. No apology. That night, she made stew from salt pork and potatoes, spoon-fed him when he couldn't lift his arm, wiped sweat from his brow with a cloth that smelled faintly of sage. He drifted off eventually, his head back in the chair, beard grayer than the week before. She sat on the floor beside him, arms around her knees, watching the fire dim into hush. In the morning, the tin cup of milk still waited at the top of the ladder. Only this time, she had been the one to place it. Spring crept back in, slow and soft-footed. Trees bloomed late, mud thickened in the hollows, and work doubled. Fences to mend, calves to brand, tools to sharpen. Elias moved slower now, the shoulder stiff, but he never asked for help. Letty gave it anyway. She oiled plow hinges, learned to throw rope, sanded the porch rail where it cracked. Every chore made her stronger, not just in the body but in the marrow. But the town hadn't forgotten her story. Not really. At the trading post, she caught two women whispering as she carried cornmeal across the room. "That's Tiat. The girl," one said. "The one he's raising without a ring. She'll ruin what's left of his good name." Letty didn't blink. But that night she scrubbed her fingernails raw, as if shame was something that could be soaped clean. Elias saw, said nothing. The next morning, he handed her a bar of soap carved in the shape of a lamb. "My sister made that once," he said quietly. "Clean lasts longer than gossip." She took it in both hands and placed it gently beside her comb. That Sunday, she sat beside him in the back pew. Every head turned, most stiff. Some didn't turn back. The preacher's voice rose above the creak of the rafters. "The Lord loves the humble, but warns the impure." Elias's jaw went hard. Letty didn't move. On the ride home, she looked up at him and asked, "Do you think I'm impure?" He slowed the horse. "I think you're whole," he said. "Even after everything, especially after." She stared out at the horizon, the grass waving like it had something to say. That night, she moved her bedroll into the house. No announcement, no explanation, just a quilt under one arm and her mother's comb in the other. Elias had already cleared a space by the hearth. She slept deeper than she had in years. Then came the letter, stained envelope, delivered by a boy with a limping foot and a scared look in his eyes. Elias opened it at the table, his hand slowed halfway down the page. He folded it, placed it under the oil lamp, and didn't say a word. Later, as Letty swept the porch, she saw him staring into the distance, the way a man does when he smells danger long before it shows its face. That night she finally asked, "Was it him?" Elias nodded. "What did he want?" "Money. To stay quiet." "You gonna pay?" Elias's voice was cold, steady. "I don't trade with rot." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. She didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the fire hiss and the wind tap slow against the window pane. When she did drift off, she dreamed of her father's laugh, cruel, sweet-sounding, always a warning. In the morning she made breakfast, biscuits, bacon, and thick coffee. When Elias sat down, she asked, "You scared?" He shook his head. "Not anymore," she said. That afternoon, a shadow passed the window. Then came the knock. Hard. Then harder. Letty froze, her hands half folding a quilt. Elias looked up from the hearth. He didn't reach for his gun. Not yet. She peeked through the curtain. 3 men on the porch, one of them she knew by the tilt of his hat, by the arrogance in his shoulders. Clovis Morgan. Her father, not dead after all, or maybe just walking like a ghost that hadn't realized it yet. Elias stood, walked to the door, opened it. The wind came first, cold, bitter, metallic. Then Clovis stepped inside, older now, bonier, eyes set deep, smirk still stretched like a knife's curve. "Well now," Clovis drawled, "ain't this cozy? Braided hair, stew on the stove, like you been raising her for keeps." Letty didn't move. The two men behind him lingered by the door, rough around the edges, guns loose at their hips. "You're not welcome here," Elias said. "Didn't come for tea, came for what's mine. She's not yours." Clovis walked slow across the floor, each bootstep deliberate, loud. "You know how much she cost me? You know how long I looked? Now you've fattened her up, made her useful." Letty's voice cut through the air like a wire. "I'm not for sale." Clovis blinked. "Well, look at that. She speaks now." She stared him down. "I learned from someone worth listening to." Clovis's smirk faltered. "You think a few soft blankets make you family?" "She is family," Elias said. "She belongs here?" Clovis sneered. "You think the town's gonna side with you when they hear I came for my daughter and you threatened me off your land?" "I don't care what they hear," Elias said, "but you've got 10 seconds to leave before you regret walking through that door." Clovis laughed. "You wouldn't shoot a man in front of her. I'd shoot a threat." One of the men shifted, his hand twitched toward his belt. Letty stepped back, her hand closing around the iron poker by the fire. Then came the shot. Just one. Elias's revolver still smoked in his hand. The rifle clattered to the floor from the hired man's hands, not dead, just bleeding. Clovis went still. "You'd kill for her?" he asked. "No," Elias said. "I'd kill to keep her." The second man backed out of the door. "He ain't paying enough for this," he muttered and disappeared into the dark. Clovis lingered. "You think she won't wake up one day and wonder what else she could have had?" Letty stepped forward. "I had nothing, until he gave me peace. You gave me shame. He gave me rest." Clovis looked at her like she was a stranger. Then he left. No final word, just wind and the slow creak of a door that didn't want to shut. Elias holstered his gun, let out a long breath. Letty stepped toward him. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" "That you had to protect me again." He looked at her, eyes lined with years but steady. "I didn't do it because I had to." She nodded, her voice softer than smoke. "I don't know what I am to you, not kin, not child, not—" He took her hand. "You're home," he said, and she believed him. After that night, the ranch quieted. But it wasn't the silence of fear, it was the hush of something earned. In the weeks that followed, Letty Ray Morgan moved like a woman fully rooted. Her braid hung looser, her hands held more weight. Her voice, when she used it, came steady as creek water. She was 17 now, lean in the hips, strong in the wrists, with a calm behind her eyes no child should ever have learned. But she had. She didn't walk behind Elias Rourke anymore. She walked beside him. The spaces between them were filled with the kind of quiet no one could label, but anyone could feel. She swept the porch before sunup. He'd leave her a second coffee cup on the rail. He sharpened the tools. She cleaned the barn before being asked. He taught her to shoot, not from fear, but because, as he said, every home ought to be able to defend itself, and this ranch, this broken, patched, sun-beaten ranch, was her home. Still, the town never stopped whispering. That's the one he kept. She's grown now, too grown for a man who never took a wife. Not right, not decent. The words reached her like distant thunder, loud but late. She didn't flinch, but Elias's silence grew more careful in public. At church, she sat in the back pew, not from shame, from habit. She liked watching who knelt too fast, who watched the door instead of the preacher. One Sunday, a visiting minister from Red Bluff took Elias aside. "You're housing a woman now," he said low, almost kindly. "Not a child. She's kin," Elias replied. "To the town, kin is just a word," the preacher said. "Then they best be careful how they use it." Letty overheard from behind the stone column. Her face went hot, not from guilt, but from carrying shame that didn't belong to her. That evening, she didn't eat supper. She sat on the porch watching fireflies blink across the pasture like stars, too restless to stay still. Elias found her with a tin cup of sweetened tea. She didn't look at him. "I can leave," she said. "I'm old enough." He sat down slowly beside her, stiff from the day's work. "You'd leave 'cause of what they say?" She shrugged. "Because I don't want you to lose more than you already have." He stared out at the horizon, same as he always did when he was thinking too much. I didn't take you in to be liked, he said. She turned her face toward him. I took you in because the world didn't, and I'd do it again, every time. Her throat clenched, she blinked hard. I just don't want you to regret me. He took her hand, same as he had years ago when she was small and scared and silent. You're not a regret, he said. You're the reason the roof holds. You're home. The next week, she asked him to teach her how to ride bareback. He didn't question it, just saddled the horse, then unsaddled it. She climbed on with a confidence carved from years of surviving. She held tight at first, then loosened, found balance. When she didn't fall, she laughed. Elias laughed too. One of those deep, chest-thudding laughs that only came from men who'd learned not to waste them. Later, she baked biscuits from scratch, carved a candle from leftover wax, set it beside his pipe on the windowsill. You fixing this place like you mean to stay, he said. She met his eyes. Ain't that what you been teaching me to do? One afternoon, a young widow from town came by to buy eggs. Polite, well-perfumed, gloves clean, smile tight. She looked from Elias to Letty, then back. You're raising her well, she said. She ain't being raised anymore, Elias said. His voice wasn't sharp, but it had a border. After she left, Letty asked quietly, do you think I'll ever be seen as my own person, or just the girl beside you? Elias looked at her for a long time. Depends on who you want to be seen by. That night, she opened the box she kept in the loft, the one with the pieces of her before. The comb, a thimble, a button, a scrap of ribbon, a single earring with a missing stone. She laid each item out like a story, then returned them, all except the comb. She placed it on Elias's table. The next morning he said nothing, but when he handed her her coffee, there was a silver button wrapped in cloth resting on the rim, from his sister's dress. No match, just memory. She tucked it in her apron pocket. It never left. Summer came hot and slow. She went barefoot in the house now, hummed while sweeping. One evening, while the light turned the fields copper, she said, You still never taught me how to dance. Elias looked up from mending tack. Didn't know if you wanted to learn. Maybe I didn't before. He stood, offered his hand. No music, just the wind, the smell of lilac from the well, and the soft rustle of the cottonwoods. She stepped into his arms, not like a child, not like a wife, just someone who had come to trust the space beside another. They didn't dance long, just enough. When they sat again, she whispered, You're the reason I'm not what they said I'd become. He shook his head. You did the becoming. I just kept the wolves off long enough to let you. The next day, a letter came. Clovis Morgan was dead, shot in another county trying to collect debt from a widow who had nothing left to give. The sheriff enclosed two things, a land deed to a useless patch of prairie, and a pouch of coins. When Letty opened the pouch, she counted the exact amount her father had sold her for. She didn't cry, didn't speak. That night, she threw the coins into the fire, watched them melt down without blinking, then turned to Elias. Can we go for a ride tomorrow? She asked. I want to see the ridge. He nodded. Neither of them said why. In the morning, as the sun poured slow amber light across the land, she stepped out onto the porch, braids damp, boots polished, a basket of fold-us, linens under one arm. She was no longer a girl. She was Letty Ray Morgan, and she was not afraid. The prairie had grown with her, harder in some places, softer in others, and it would remember the girl who stayed.